Order and a roll call from the Madam City Clerk.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem John Harabedian.
Here.
Councilmember Rochelle Arizmendi.
Present.
Councilmember John Kaposha.
Here.
Councilmember Jean Gosh.
Here.
And we know our mayor's as not present at this point, so Mayor Pro Tem, you have a quorum and may conduct city business.
Thank you. And Councilmember Kaposha is going to lead us in the pledge and the invocation.
Hey, everybody, please stand, face the flag, right hand over your heart, and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hey, I'm going to make a few comments. This is our last council meeting. Everybody can sit. We're not gonna pray here. I'm just gonna talk a little bit. But you guys can sit too if you'd like. In fact, I'll sit also. This is our last council meeting before the November 6th election. And I've often commented just my disbelief that our rate of participation in the elections overall are so low, and especially a community like Sierra Madre that has so many blessings that I just really don't understand why people just cannot take the time to demonstrate their commitment to democracy and the ideals and values that our country was founded on. So I'm starting to read a book by, the last book by Senator John McCain. It's called The Restless Wave, Good Times, Just Causes, Great Fights, and other things. But the book starts out, he's talking about in 1991, a memorial at Pearl Harbor at the Arizona Memorial, and George Bush was the speaker. And what George Bush was talking about so much was the sacrifice that these people gave and what this meant for the world. So it was a very emotional speech, according to John McCain, and President Bush had a really tough time controlling his own emotions at the end, and he closed the speech with the sentence, "May God bless them," referring to the heroes of the harbor, those that fought in the war and at Pearl Harbor. "May God bless them, and may God bless America, the most wondrous land on earth." Then John McCain, in the book here, then reflects on that a little bit, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of quotes of what he says about that. "The most wondrous land on earth, indeed. What a privilege it is to serve this big, boisterous, brawling, intemperate, striving, daring, beautiful, bountiful, brave, magnificent country. With all our flaws, all our mistakes, with all the frailties of human nature as much on display as our virtues, with all the rancor and anger of our politics, we are blessed. We are living in the land of the free, the land where anything is possible. We are blessed, and in turn we have been a blessing to humanity. The world order we helped build from the ashes of World War that we defend to this day has liberated more people from tyranny and poverty than ever before in history. We have sought to make the world more stable and secure, not just our own society. We have advanced norms and rules of international relations that have benefited all. We have stood up to tyrants for mistreating their people even when they didn't threaten us, not always, but often. We live in a land made from ideals, not blood and soil. We are custodians of those ideals at home and their champion abroad. We have done great good in the world because we believed our ideals are the natural aspiration of all mankind, and the principles, rules, and alliances of the international order we superintended would improve the security and prosperity of all who joined with us. That leadership has had its cost, but we have become incomparably powerful and wealthy as well. We have a moral obligation to continue in our just cause, and we would bring more than shame on ourselves if we let other powers assume our leadership role, powers that reject our values and resent our influence. We will not thrive in a world where our leadership and ideals are absent. These are powerful words, and when November 6th comes, when you vote and you wear that little sticker to say, I voted, presumably it's because you believe in the ideals and values that John McCain so eloquently articulated here. And I just hope that everybody steps up and realizes what we have in this country and what we've been, and take that responsibility seriously on November 6th. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear. Thank you. And with that, any changes to the agenda?
None.
Okay, I'll take an approval motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And that is 4-0. The minutes.
Minutes are good.
Fine to me.
Approve.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
That's 4-0. And we will get a report out of closed session from Madam City Attorney.
No reportable actions.
Thank you. Any reports from anyone?
Here.
Real quick, I did attend the Water Committee of the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, and the water level in the main San Gabriel Basin is once again at an all-time low, despite of the average rainfall that we had last year, and despite the fact that all the producers in the San Gabriel that produce from the main basin have been assessed an extra fee to purchase replenishment water. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, how much water was purchased just to help bring the level up. And in spite of that, we are now again at an all-time low. So the drought is with us, and there was a lot of discussion about this, and the concerns I had about it was, gee, it looks like it's a possibility that it can only get worse. Now, I do want to say, too, that in spite of that, the Metropolitan Water District and our own agency has purchased enough water, so we do have quite a bit of water in reserve. But if we don't, and I'm not talking about Sierra Madre, but just all of the San Gabriel Valley, don't take this seriously and reduce our consumption of water, we could be exposed in the future where many of the wells are no longer able to produce. There's a possibility of groundwater contamination from it getting so low. And it just seems to me, I just urge everybody to continue to reduce their usage of water and get over the thought that you have an entitlement to green, lush lawns and vegetation. That's just not the reality that we're facing here in California. So just wanted to report on that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Who else wants? How are you?
Good.
Hi. Who else wants to talk? Hi, I'm Denise. Anybody else want to talk, or did you all talk?
I'll talk now rather than at the end, but I think everyone who'd lost power during the latest wind episode, some folks were reaching out to council members to get updates, and I'm sure to staff. And frankly, we weren't getting great responses and updates from Southern California Edison. So I'm throwing that out there to make sure that folks who were annoyed and were angry know that we all were. And so what we're going to do moving forward is bring in our Southern California Edison representative to talk through kind of in the future how things can be better in terms of getting our city staff and our city council information so that we can keep all the residents up to date. So that was something I just want to make sure we touched upon, because I know that I've talked to a few people who had similar reactions. So
Thank you. Anything from you?
No report, but I also did not mean to wear red today. Sorry, folks.
Oh, we were not supposed to wear red?
Red Sox.
Red Sox.
Just to say, this is not
giant.
red. This is burnt orange. Anybody remember the 70s when we had burnt orange and avocado green? This is burnt orange. I do want to know, do we have anybody out in the audience who's following the game?
Yes. It's 3-2 Boston.
Do we have anybody up in the dais
Yes.
who's following the game? Councilman Goss, do you have anything?
I do not.
And all I want to say is I'm sorry I'm tardy. Work kept me a little later tonight. And also, I'm going to be doing the Halloween decoration judging on Saturday, which I'm really looking forward to. And I've enlisted my 3 granddaughters to come and help. So they're very excited about that. Okay, if we don't have any other reports, do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda? Oh, come forward. I like that he raised his hand, though. That was nice.
David Gordon, I'm the president of the Sierra Madre Playhouse, and I wish to alert everybody to our forthcoming production of A Christmas Story. We did it last year. It's returning by popular demand. I will quote from I can find it, from Francis Nicholson, Pasadena Star News. 4 stars, A Christmas Story is a great gift, a chance to see it done right, much to enjoy, from gifted child performers to solid and artful direction. You've probably seen the movie. It's even better in real life. It's on from November the 23rd to December the 30th. Go to the website, book your tickets now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Hi, welcome. Your name, please.
Good evening. I'm Helen Romero Shaw, Southern California Gas Company, not Edison, Gas Company. And Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and staff. I'm here just to talk briefly about an issue that is very important to Southern California Gas Company. And I don't think that perhaps your residents in Sierra Madre may not be aware of this. But a little bit of background: for 150 years, we've been delivering natural gas to residents so that they can warm their homes and do their cooking. And also, many of your employers use natural gas for industrial, commercial applications. But the issue that's concerning us are the policies that are being pushed at the state of California level. Policymakers and legislators are now wanting to electrify the whole state of California. And natural gas has been part of the balanced energy portfolio of the state. And we're really working hard to continue having natural gas as part of the what we call the best energy management portfolio. So I'm here to just remind you that that we need to have natural gas for the following reasons. At the state level, there was a push to just go to all electric buildings and even try to retrofit existing buildings, and fortunately those proposals were defeated. There's a lot of goals that are very laudable. We all want to reach our environmental goals, but SoCalGas believes that there should be a choice, that residents, business owners should be able to choose between having all electricity and then also having natural gas, and that the ability to have natural gas shouldn't be pulled away and forcing homeowners to replace their natural gas appliances. As a matter of fact, we have some statistics here about costs. To go from natural gas to electricity, it would be $7,200 per home, and then the cost of electricity bills are going to be close to $400 per year more than natural gas. There is another alternative, and that's renewable natural gas. This is capturing the gas before it goes into the atmosphere from dairies and landfills, cleaning it and putting it into the pipeline. As a matter of fact, we just got the permission from the California Public Utilities Commission, permission to do this, to get renewable natural gas and use it at company-owned refueling stations. That means cars and fleet vehicles and transit vehicles can fill up with renewable natural gas. If we could put just 16% of the natural gas and deliver it to customer, and then coming from renewable natural gas, we would have the same effect on greenhouse gas emissions as the same as electrifying all of California. Just think about it, only 16% putting renewable natural gas into the pipeline system. And all at a much lower cost, and we feel we can attain all of this by 2030. So that's what I'm presenting to you tonight. I hope the City Council will think this over. I hope that the residents of Sierra Madre will also keep this in mind, that a balanced approach is better for the state, for the city of Sierra Madre, and we can also achieve our environmental goals, have choice, electricity, natural gas, and minimize disruption and keep the costs down. So I appreciate your attention. I will be sending some more information to the city manager, and I'm asking that he share it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who wishes to speak? Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. I'm Vickery Murphy. I'm with Senator Portantino's office. I know several of you already. And I am the new co-rep for Sierra Madre, and so I'm here to introduce myself, and I have some of my cards I'll leave you. And also to let you know, if you haven't already heard, that the Senator's Women in Business, it's the legislative update, but also recognition of outstanding business women. The event is going to be December 4th, and we're still taking nominations through November 1st. So I have flyers for that, and I can leave a few of them in the back for community members, but also I'll pass some to you guys. And if I don't know whether the city clerk puts things or not or whatever, but if you did, we can get something to you electronically if that helps, or anything like that. So anyway, here I am at your service. So
Welcome. Thank you. Do we have anybody else who would like to speak on public comments? If not, I'll go ahead and close public comment. And next we have our consent calendar. And we'll turn this over to our Madam City Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the consent calendar, item 1A, adoption of resolution 18-55 of the City Council of the City of Sierra Madre approving certain demands. Item 1B, second reading of ordinance 1404, amending Title 17 zoning, Chapter 17.22, second units of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code, omitting the periodic inspection requirement for a second unit permit. Item 1C, consideration of resolution 18-56, adopting the city's fraud policy. And item 1D, consideration of cancellation of the December 25th, 2018 City Council meeting. And that concludes the consent items.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on any of these items, A, B, C, or D?
I have a question on 1C, but if anyone have a question on 1A or B. This is just a basic question about the fraud policy, which is, if you read through it, it really is incumbent on the city manager, department directors, each employee to adhere to certain things, and kind of the buck almost stops with the city manager. And I know this applies to the city council, but I assume that we took this from another city or another agency where that's kind of the norm, where for various reasons you wouldn't want the city council to have, if you will, direct authority over the fraud policy or direct responsibility. Because that, I guess that just, I can see why you wouldn't want necessarily the city council to have that.
So Mayor Pro Tem, I hadn't actually considered that viewpoint, but we had our contract attorneys, LCW, draft the fraud policy, and I'm not sure where they, if they borrowed it from another city or not, but this was their recommendation.
Okay.
Anybody else? Do we need to have a discussion about item D, or are we all pretty much in agreement on that?
Christmas without a city council meeting.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you really didn't want to come. Okay.
No brainer.
All right, we'll open up for public comment for items A, B, C, and D. Not seeing anybody come forth. We'll close public comment. And can we get a motion?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have consideration of Resolution 1854 in opposition of Los Angeles County Ballot Measure W.
Mayor, we'll have Management Analyst Carlson address this.
And good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. Item number 2 for you this evening is Resolution 1854 in opposition of Los Angeles County Measure W. Based on previous council action, staff is recommending that the City Council adopt Resolution 1854 in opposition of Los Angeles County Measure W. Alternatively, the City Council may amend Resolution 1854 as presented and adopt, and I will make the amendments and get the signature by the end of the joint meeting tonight if so necessary. At the request of City Council Member John Capocha, staff presented a discussion item at the July 10th, 2018 City Council meeting regarding the County of Los Angeles' Safe Clean Water proposed parcel tax. And at the conclusion of the discussion, there was consensus to direct staff to return to City Council with the resolution in opposition, if it was ultimately approved by the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors at their July 17th meeting. Now, the Board of Supervisors did actually approve the parcel tax to be included in this November 6th, 2018 general election, and it is now more commonly known as Measure W. In a nutshell, it's a 2.5 cent parcel tax per square foot of impermeable surfaces on a person's property. It is estimated to bring in about $300 million annually for stormwater projects, drought resiliency, and additional benefits. I have provided some minor updates in the program in your staff report, and I've also provided some updated funding estimates for you as well. And with that, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Do we have any questions? Any comments, or can I go to public comment? I'll go ahead and take public comment. Good evening.
Marguerite Schuster, 675 Mount Wilson Trail. First, a word of thanks to Councilmember Capocha for his always careful analysis and also for his report on the unfortunate state of our own water table. I don't doubt that there are problems with this measure. In fact, I suspect that I would personally be burned in various ways by it. Unfortunately, though, I don't think there are any perfect human or political measures, and we don't have time to wait for a perfect measure. I know of no serious analysis of the state of water in California that doesn't determine that we are drawing at an unsustainable rate, both from our groundwater and from the Colorado River, with very, very serious environmental effects. And I know of no serious analysis that suggests that we are going magically to be rescued by climatic change in the right direction. The only better time to take as dramatic action as we can possibly take, the only better day than today for that kind of dramatic action is yesterday. We're behaving at the moment like the person who goes to the ATM and without checking the balance and assuming that so long as money comes out, everything must be fine. That works until no money comes out, and at that point, the repercussions, the dramatic character of the action needed, and the expense becomes completely overwhelming and perhaps completely disabling to the less advantaged among us. I propose, therefore, and beg you at least to withdraw your opposition to this measure if you cannot bring yourselves to support it, recognizing that, of course, there will need to be adjustments along the way, as there always are. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else from the public who would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to our city council. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding this? We did have a fairly big discussion on this originally.
Well, I'd like to, of course, I'd like
Really?
to comment.
That's such a surprise. Okay, go ahead.
My main issue with this is not that it's not perfect, it's just that it's totally, for the San Gabriel Valley, totally unnecessary. As I've said before, and again, this is just not my opinion, this is experts from our Los Angeles County Flood Control, our water agencies say the same thing. Anybody in the San Gabriel Valley, that any of the waterways, the Rio Hondo or the San Gabriel River, 95% of that stormwater is already captured in all but the very, very, very worst of the storms. The other thing is that it supposedly is, you know, to clean the environment. If there are pollutants, which I'm sure there are that are running off our streets, the idea was to keep it from going to the ocean. And as I said, in the San Gabriel Valley, it's not going to the ocean. It's captured. It gets no further than the Santa Fe spreading grounds or the Whittier Narrows spreading grounds. But the folks that created this permit, who are not elected officials, they're the Regional Water Quality Board, they are not even following the rules of the Clean Water Act. The waterways, the San Gabriel River and the Rio Hondo River that transport the stormwater, are not designated as impaired by the pollutants that we are required to mitigate, because they have not put these waterways on the, if they were impaired waterways, they would be on the federal 303D list, and they are not. But yet we are having to engineer expensive systems to divert the water and capture it further upstream to supposedly keep these pollutants out of those waterways. But again, the waterways are not polluted according to the EPA rules. So you in the San Gabriel Valley are not going to get any benefit from this tax whatsoever. Now, you would be subsidizing other areas that might, mitigate some pollution, but your dollars in the San Gabriel Valley are not going towards that. So to me, the approach is to continue to work with the regional board to get them to be a little bit more realistic about what they're trying to achieve for the money. We don't have an endless supply of money to work on everything. For the money that would be spent on this, I believe that that money could be spent, if you're concerned about the environment, on many other projects. Subsidizing diesel cleanup would be a much better, where you all would benefit from it, than something like this. Well, you'll receive no benefit. So that's not in the report, but that is well-documented truth that I'm speaking here.
Thank you. Anybody else from council like to comment? No? Are we ready to take a vote?
Yeah.
Someone
Well,
wanna-
I move that we approve this as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. So it looks like that concludes our 6:30 meeting, and we need to go on to our 7. Does anybody realize the clock is not correct back
Yeah.
there?
An hour off.
Because according to that clock, I wasn't late, just want to say. Okay, so why don't we take a quick break?
You're going to adjourn and then reopen.
Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So we'll go ahead and adjourn and meet, come back in about 5 minutes so we can get our planning commission up here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If we can have everybody take a seat. So welcome back. We are here for a very special meeting, a special joint study session of the City Council and Planning Commission. Before we begin, we need to have a game update. 3-3. Okay. An inning? What inning are we in?
Bottom of the fifth.
Bottom of the fifth.
First
Okay.
Still in. Sails out.
Okay. So let's go ahead if we could have, where's our city clerk? Oh, there. Hi. Can you please do roll call for both City Council and Planning Commission, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor Denise Delmar.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem John Harabedian.
Here.
Councilmember Rochelle Arzmende.
Present.
Councilmember John Kaposha.
Here.
And Councilmember Jean Gosh.
Here.
And from our Planning Commission, Chair John Hutt.
Here.
Vice Chair Tom Dennison. Commissioner Joe Catalano.
Here.
Commissioner Manish Desai.
Here.
Commissioner Gina Fryer Hunt. Commissioner Bill Pevsner. And Commissioner Bob Spears.
Present.
That concludes the roll.
Thank you. Huh?
Sorry.
So, welcome. This is a special treat having you guys here. We really appreciate it. And before we begin, I would just like to extend my gratitude on the work that you do. It's awesome. A lot of work. I agree with your decisions. You contemplate and discuss and think out of the box. So, thank you all for the service that you provide to us. At this time, we will have public comment if there's any items that are not on the agenda. And our items for discussion, just so you all know, are consideration of a citywide historic resources survey, Mills Act contract update, and first soft story and unreinforced masonry buildings. So do we have anybody from the public who would like to comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back. And we have our Director of Planning, and we have our City Manager at the kids' table. So, hi. Alrighty, so where would you all like to begin? We're going to talk about the consideration of citywide historic resources surveys. And did everybody get the PowerPoint presentation?
We have a PowerPoint presentation beginning with City Manager England.
Okay. Can you please state your name? Just kidding.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Council, and Commission. I'm going to stand to give the presentation because that feels real weird right there. So we're gonna be a little bit more formal here. As the Mayor just went over, these are the topics we'll be discussing this evening. I'll be giving the presentation on the Citywide Historic Resources Survey. Director Gonzalez will be giving an update on the Mills contract, and Commissioner Spears will be talking about first soft story and unreinforced masonry buildings. So what we're looking at tonight is to bring forward a plan for a historic resources survey that complies with the direction that Council gave us and also doesn't impose too heavy of a regulatory burden on the public. When we went back and listened to all the various meetings that the Planning Commission had on this and the Council had, we believe the direction that we received was to create a program which really protects and identifies our historic resources as well as documents them and evaluates them. And after having gone through this, what the ordinance that we adopted was any structure 75 years or greater could be viewed as a potential historic resource or asset, and any property owner wanting to make significant alteration or demolition to it would have to provide a historic resources survey to the Planning Commission before proceeding. To date, we've received 43 historic resource evaluation reports, and what we found is that each report can cost up to $5,000, and they can take multiple months to complete. And out of that, 32 of the 43 were determined to have no cultural significance. And moving forward, we don't intend to change the submission of historic resources survey, but what we do want to do is find a way to give property owners who likely don't have a historic asset or historic property a cheaper way to make that determination. So the proposal for discussion tonight by both bodies, but not for a vote, just to give us direction, is to allow staff to amend the code to bring forward what's called an abbreviated report. And what this will do is continue any property 75 years of age or older will still be required if they want to make an alteration or demolition to get the historic resources survey. The abbreviated report will approach the property as if it's historic, so the property will have to prove that it's not historic, so it strengthens the ordinance a little bit. What the abbreviated report does is it's much quicker and it costs less for the residents. If during the abbreviated report it's determined there is potential historic significance, then they have to go forward with the full-blown historic resources survey if they do today. Another benefit, though, I forgot to put the bullet point on, is right now the historic resources report does not address cultural significance. In the abbreviated report, we found a way to incorporate some research with our archivist at the library who can provide review to determine if there's any cultural significance as well. So the outcome is a primary record, the same as we would get for if we completed a drive-by survey. We also think we can reduce that cost by bidding it to one person so they know that they'll do multiple reports in any given time period. So with that, Director Gonzalez or I can answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. So what kind of questions do we have? Do we have anything over on this side? What do you guys?
Well, one question I had off the bat was on the abbreviated survey, would the city provide some sort of, I want to say template or basis for that? Because having gone through a historical survey myself for my property, we know we have a list at the city here of 5 to 7 consultants, and many of them don't, they basically provide one sort of report, you know, and so, and they may not provide an abbreviated version, and you're going to wind up, you know, it's the same whether you do an abbreviated or a full survey. They just charge you kind of the prices that you listed. So it'd be ideal if there's an abbreviated version that it would be something, there'd be a template or a form or what the required information is, so that then they can say, okay, yeah, we can provide that for.
Certainly, that would be one of the items that I would like to come up with, exactly what criteria we would like to include in that abbreviated report, and most importantly is including a primary record. So that way we start compiling a primary record of all the properties that come in, whether they have a status code of 6Z, which means that there's no significance, or if it is a potential eligible property.
Okay.
I would agree and want to see a list of basic requirements. There are things that in some reports that I have seen, things that ought to have been researched more carefully are just kind of thrown out at the end of the report for the staff or the commission to make their own judgment on. In other words, they hadn't stepped up to the plate the way they should have. There are 5 criteria. If you go back to the underlying laws, there are 5 criteria under the federal guidelines, and there are also 5 very, very similar criteria under the state guidelines. And when we talk about windshield survey or just architectural appearance, we are generally only hitting on one of the 5. And so we should include in our requirements to the consultants that they do check all 5 boxes.
We'll make sure that's included.
Do we, and I got a question from the side. So what we normally do is we'll do questions for these gentlemen, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. Yes, how did we determine what an abbreviated cost would be? I mean, what's the basis for that lower cost?
We did a test basis and on one project that we knew that it was so altered it's most likely not going to require a full report. And that cost by one of our consultants on our pre-approved list charged $800 and said that probably there was still a bit of work still involved in compiling the report and doing some research, and that it should probably be priced at approximately $1,200. So that's where we came up with that as kind of a test case.
Yeah. Now, for the cultural part, City Manager England, you said that we could have the library do some of that research and there'd be a cost or a charge back for the time involved.
I spoke with the city librarian earlier this week. That was my proposal. She wants to provide the resource upon request for no charge, as she feels it meets the mission of the library, and the city's okay with that as long as the work's getting checked off.
How many? The council or the city manager? Oh, okay. I think this is closer. Okay. So how much time would be required to do the cultural aspect of it with our library staff?
Again, depending on what we find, if it's early on in the process and we find a cultural component, then they're going to have to take it from there because it's been identified that it needs the full resources survey. If they go into it and there's nothing on record and there's nothing when they do research, then they'll get a letter stating that after research through the archives, we didn't find anything.
Okay.
And I just wanted to point out, we do have our city librarian back there if you have any questions for her as well. Yes?
So similar question, or line of question at least, because, you know, my understanding was that during an unabbreviated surveyor report, you know, a lot of what goes into it is looking at whether the house is architecturally significant or if it's, you know, culturally, historically significant. And so what I guess what I don't get here is what is the abbreviation, what problem is it solving? Is it the architectural side or is it the cultural side? Because the historic side seems like if all you're doing is going to the city library and looking at, you know, and utilizing the librarian to look at a few documents, you know, a lot of people might cry foul, right? Like you're not even doing half of the work that you should be to determine whether this is significant. So, you know, is it really just an abbreviated architectural look and then trying to then do some cultural historical look as well?
That would be correct. That would the goal would be to determine architectural significance.
So then I guess, you know, does it really work? I mean, in theory, this sounds great because you don't have to pay $800 to $1,200. But if you're still, it seems like we're not solving that second piece, right? Which was it's always the hard piece, which is, you know, you can bring in a lot of these consultants that very quickly will tell you architecturally and whatnot whether something's significant. But it's always did the two-time mayor in 1910 or Lucky Baldwin live there? And it's always hard to get that right? So
Do you want to address it? So that's correct. The cultural piece is more subjective. It's more difficult to determine the community standards on what is culturally significant. So if a mayor lived on a property, does that make it culturally significant? Perhaps you could look at it
I would say no.
that way.
Yeah.
If some local artist of note, for example, which we have a recent application from the Planning Commission for, is that culturally significant? I think some people would say that is. I think some people would say it is not. So right now, the cultural significance piece through the proposal of the drive-by survey is not addressed at all. It is a portion of our code. So we're trying to find a way to meet that obligation in the code without a really clear mechanism on what is subjective by its nature.
And if I can also add, the cultural determination does not prevent a property owner from altering that structure as well. Many times we would ask for possibly photographic evidence or that report to be placed in the library archives. It could also be designated with a plaque on the site.
Who makes that determination of what to do if there is cultural significance?
That would be, if there's found to be cultural significance currently, then we usually would investigate further, make that determination, and staff would bring that information back to the Planning Commission if it's associated with an application.
So the Planning Commission would decide whether
There's cultural significance or not.
Well, if it's found to be culturally significant, then there are several options available to you. Photograph put in the library, like you say, put a plaque in front of the house, or preserve the whole structure, I suppose.
That would be correct.
So the Planning Commission would have the crack at making that determine how to preserve the cultural significance of it. Okay.
I think one thing, though, to keep in mind is we often don't find pure cultural significance absent architectural. They often go hand in hand. Like, we recently designated the house of the first mayor, and the house itself was a fantastic house. You'll remember that. And so the cultural and the architecture go together. It's rare that we get just a total piece of junk that some famous person was in. And so that's a kind of thing where, as Vincent was saying, you can do a plaque, or even then, if you do pictures, maybe it doesn't even matter as much. So I think one of the things is that's somewhat of a red herring, because really the ones that we really want to save often have both.
So, and I think we agree with that, Chair Hutt, and it is interesting that we have, I think at the last Planning Commission meeting, we had a property that had no historic significance, but cultural significance for a culturally significant artist, and what the Planning Commission decided is the original project, they asked them to save the structure. They really improved the design of it, and we were able to keep a culturally significant piece of our history in town, even though the workshop itself wasn't necessarily historically significant. But when we talk about trying to strengthen the ordinance that we have, giving more of a review to the cultural piece may uncover some more of that. But in general, I think what Chair Hutt's saying is correct.
Yes, we have to remember, this is a good case in point, we have to remember that very few of even the ones that make it all the way to the commission are for our applications to completely destroy the structure and replace it, for instance, or either by demolition or by some kind of serious alteration to the view that you have from the street. There are an awful lot of these projects where, for instance, they want to add on to the back, right? So we're dealing with something that's really much easier for us to consider, and the requests to totally destroy something that's a potential a resource are pretty few and far between, aren't they?
On the other hand, we had a case on Baldwin that was the first doctor in town, his office, and the structure was without architectural significance. It had been modified so much, and yet the applicant had to go through all these reports because it was over 75 years old, and the end result was that we asked for a plaque, and they can proceed with their project. So we try to balance out the significance of the structure and the significance of its cultural contribution.
Right, but I think that project in particular points out a big problem with how our current ordinance is implemented, in that the decision maker of the replacement application is the one who makes the final determination on the historic nature. And so by the time that one came to us, they had been working for over a year, maybe 2 years, and we got to the point where we said, we really don't think this thing is very historic. And the applicant said, if I'd known that from the get-go, I would have torn this thing down. And you look at the building and you're like, yeah, you should have. And so if we do have a preliminary report up front that can guide people as to what's going to happen, we can make a lot smarter choices. And I think, we've talked about the benefit of a historic citywide survey so people know ahead of time. This doesn't give you quite as much foreknowledge, but it gives you a little bit more than what we have now, and we can hopefully head off those situations.
If you go into the the state and the federal underlying requirements, the 5 criteria that I referred to a few minutes ago, there's one big one in the beginning that you have to pass through, and then there are different criteria associated with significant people or in the architecture, so on and so forth. But the first one, the first one has to do with the integrity of the property and whether it still meets certain tests for what it can convey about the history. And if you cannot make those findings, then the others are pretty much off the table. So just like what you were talking about a minute ago, that probably should have been thrown out immediately, just from the standpoint that it had been altered so much that it really didn't have any integrity left historically. We shouldn't even have to go through the rest of it.
Do we have, if someone purchases a home that's 75 years or older, how do they know that they may need to get a survey done ahead of time? Because the whole premise of doing the citywide survey was when you bought the home, you would know, right? So how are people getting that information?
So I think when every resident moves here, they immediately read the code, so they're up on everything.
Well, I did, but I don't think everybody did.
If they do not know that, they likely will not know until they come to the counter and seek to alter their property. We had some preliminary discussion about requiring it as a disclosure through realtors, and we decided in consultation with the city attorney at the time, for various reasons, that probably wouldn't be sufficient. So I think you have identified a fair criticism of this plan.
Okay.
On the other hand, this town went through a huge boom in the 50s. So we're seeing lots and lots of homes that are going to fall under that 75-year rule. And it's going to be an overwhelming burden pretty soon and take up a lot of staff time unless we can fine-tune it.
Well, and I think that's going to be the question, is to see if 75 is the magic number or not, and if we reevaluate that.
So that is a possibility to reevaluate that 75 years.
Well, we're going to hit that critical mass at one point or another, whether it's 75 or we push it back and that huge mass of housing doesn't come up for another 10 years. We're still going to, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road anyway.
Yeah, but the council hasn't kicked the can at all since we've been together.
We're not can kickers.
All right, good. Okay, so
we're not can kickers.
Since we're not, the vast majority of that boom after World War II were those little stucco ranch burgers, and they may be very, very easy to just check that box and. Right. And do an abbreviated thing on it. I think it just, but if you look at what would comprise this huge rush, then it just says, yeah, we should really go ahead with the abbreviated version right now.
One concern I have about City Manager, you mentioned about sole sourcing it. Would there be a perception that we've rigged it with having just one vendor to provide the services?
Depending on if the reports are written independently and accurately or not, I can certainly see that. I know we've heard different feedback. I think we have 5 currently that do the full-blown abbreviated report, and we get lots of feedback on what people think about each one of them. The sole source was an attempt to make it cheaper, but if the council and the commission wish, we can just bid it out to any eligible person. The second benefit of the sole source was consistency and how it's approached. So I think there is a benefit, but maybe we need to have some type of way to pull the plug on the contract if we're finding we're not getting sufficient results.
Yeah.
I do like that we would have control over who's doing the survey as opposed to the homeowner.
Right. I think one of the two, since we last updated, we found that the two big issues that we're facing is a lot of homeowners who, it's pretty obvious to tell, don't have historic homes, are having to do these very expensive surveys, and then also have their projects delayed quite a bit. But the other is if you do get the dreaded underhanded developer type, because they get a pick who does this thing, they pre-select by calling up and asking them, well, what do you think? And I'm not going to retain you until, and then they go down the list and find the one. So if we could source from the same thing, I think we would head that off. And also, we have seen, I think it's fair to say, a difference in quality.
Yeah.
So,
Soup to nuts.
in some ways, we could start to almost build a citywide historic survey if we had a consistent application of these. And so I think it would be a lot better if we could have, the city charge a fee and then have a sole source contract. And then also we can add in the part from the library.
Okay.
Anything else on this? It sounds like we're all sort of heading towards this direction. It'll probably have to be massaged just a little bit, but I think this is a good alternative to doing the citywide survey. And I also like that it doesn't cost the homeowner as much as that it was costing, because I do think that's sometimes, I mean, I'm sure it never ever happens here in Sierra Madre, but why people don't get the permits and all of a sudden the house is gone. So, good.
What comment for this section, Mayor? Or are you doing?
Do we want to? I mean, this is a study session, so I guess we could. Anybody want to do? We could do public comment. Sure, why not?
Why not?
Why not? Anybody want to talk about the survey? Look, we have a taker. Hi.
Robert Cherday, Vista Circle Drive. So I was wondering about how you came up with the 75-year point. I mean, because as I get older, as the city gets older, 75 years doesn't seem that long ago. Hard to think of it as being historic. My house was 50 years old when I bought it 20 years ago. Now it's 70 years old, and I'm thinking, God, this is possibly a historic building that has to have this kind of review. But do you know what percentage of houses fall in the 75%? Or 75?
We did. That's how we came to that. I mean, we did this whole calculation formula and spent many minutes and discussing this in meetings. So somehow we came up with the 75. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you how we did that, but it doesn't mean that we can't change that too.
So maybe instead of having a 75-year limit, I mean, you set it to a certain year, like just before the boom, the housing boom, like the post-World War II housing boom.
We thought of that.
We did.
I forgot why we decided.
Because that would at least kind of stay static. You wouldn't have this problem with all of a sudden 80% of the houses in Sierra Madre have to have these, while it's not as expensive as the other reviews, it still is a burden.
I know the answer to
that. Oh,
that.
good. Okay.
Because something you build today might be historic someday. And if you just set the date, then it never becomes historic.
But then, in that case, there could be a 40-year-old house that is culturally significant right now.
You could.
That wouldn't.
You could. I mean, in the magic number, and Joe backed this up, is 50 years in most places where they start looking. So we've already backed up quite a bit, and I think that, when you make these balancing acts, you try to preserve all the good stuff without putting too much regulation undue on things that aren't historic. And that's you got to pick a number, or you got to have some other formula. But a lot of cities and do 50 years.
50 years is very, very common around the nation. So I think that 75 was a fairly conservative choice here.
And is the issue of not doing a citywide survey just the cost of that? So you're just spreading the cost out to the residents.
Yeah.
Directly when they do building, as opposed to just doing everything.
And I think we'll get more accuracy if we can do individual ones as opposed to a drive-by.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, though.
A drive-by will only cover a very, very small portion of what the real considerations are.
Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about the survey? We have another taker. Come on down.
I am Barry Gold, 441 Ramona Avenue. Good evening, Mayor Del Mar and council members and Chair Hutt and commissioners. I am a member of the Preserve Sierra Madre Group Steering Committee. And first of all, tonight I'd like to thank our wonderful City Council and our fabulous Planning Commission for your strong support for preserving historical sites here in our city of Sierra Madre, starting with the City Council's passage of the General Plan Update a couple of years ago, which as one of its goals is supporting our historical assets. And to the Planning Commission, who in the last couple of years has made tremendous strides in recommending to the City Council code changes to support the goals of the General Plan Update. And the City Council, to their great credit, has almost unanimously, if not maybe unanimously, passed all of the recommendations from the Planning Commission. Oh, okay. As part of the Preserve Sierra Madre group's goals, preservation is a large part of that, of historic sites. And recently, two of our members, Judy Gold and Ann Chesterman, have done a windshield survey of this entire city and come up with a list of close to 800 houses that are all older than 75 years. And tonight I'm going to present that list to our city clerk to forward on to you to use for any way you find helpful in your decision-making process of how you want to handle this. Whether you do a citywide survey, whether you give our current 75-year ordinance a chance to work some more and see how it goes. I understand the pros and cons of both. There are good arguments for both, and citywide survey would certainly let everybody know when they buy a house whether it is going to become under the historic guidelines. Of course, then there's a cost to the city for that. But I believe that people who buy houses that are maybe 75 years old or not, and there has not been a city survey, they buy it under the with the understanding that they have no restrictions, and then when they go to take out a permit for something, they might find out that there will be restrictions if it's considered to be historic. So both ways, you have a tough decision to make. We just want to thank you for your strong support of preservation and know that you'll do the thing that's best for Sierra Madre. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. And thank you, Ann and Judy, for doing that research. Anybody else like to talk about the survey?
Marguerite Schuster again. Just a word in favor of the citywide survey, with a little bit of a plug for eyes and ears that will be attentive when historic properties are in fact being modified without anybody's permission, and when properties of known historic significance, I'm thinking in particular right now of the Carter Barn and Macomber Cabin, we all know that they have historic significance. We have agreed that they must be preserved, but they are suffering, as someone called it, demolition by neglect, that we are at risk of losing things that are significant historically and perhaps precious to us in many other ways, simply because we are not paying attention. And when we do not pay attention, we suddenly find that the nature of the community has changed. We feel it in our gut, and we hardly know what has happened simply because we haven't been looking. Thanks.
Thank you.
671 Brookside Lane. I'd just like to add that no matter what we do, we need oversight. We need people to watch what's going on and to have a reporting and a consultation and an awareness so that it isn't just overlooked and nothing gets done in the end. We need oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. How would somebody find out if a home has a permit that has gone through the historical survey? How would a neighbor find that out, for example?
Usually if there's an entitlement associated with that, they would actually be notified as part of that requirement, a 300-foot radius notification. That would be the most immediate process in terms of being able to be informed what's occurring. Other than that, they can go to the planning department website. We do publish our planning entitlement project list and update that on a monthly basis as well.
And what is an entitlement?
So that would be any application for maybe a discretionary action either before the planning commission or staff at the staff level, administrative review level.
We have the, if we did start to compile these preliminary reports, they're public documents, right?
They are, yes.
So we could compile them in either on the city's website or in the library or both.
In many cases, once we receive a report that has architectural or cultural significance, we do submit that to the library for the archives.
But it would also be helpful to have a preliminary report that says it's not.
It would, and
because then you would know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Okay. So, does our city attorney, Lindsay, have anything?
There's nothing to add.
Have we introduced you? See, we have not. Okay, see, I wasn't here at the beginning. Thank you. Lindsay, and the last name is? Zwigger is filling in for our Terry Highsmith, and we thank you for attending. How's it going so far?
It's great. Thank you for having me. This is a beautiful city.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, so do we have any more discussion about the survey, or can we move on to our next discussion item?
I just had a quick point, and I guess the only concern, I guess, would be that this could actually be more expensive for folks, right? If they have to do the abbreviated survey, then the full survey. We should work in something to where they're not paying the $1,200 plus the full $5,000. Like the providers just have to know if they're providing the abbreviated and then providing the full, that the homeowners should not be paying more than they would have paid in the first instance, you know.
So we're still working on the exact mechanism. The initial idea we have is that the homeowner agrees if this, if it's found to be likely significant, that they've already agreed with the same person to trigger the full survey at that cost.
And it gets netted out.
It's one of the ideas. It is on our radar. We haven't quite ironed it out yet.
Is it possible that we could do the sole sourcing for the full reports as well? Because I mean, I think if you're doing the preliminary report, whatever the consultant is, they've probably done quite a bit of the research.
Right. That's certainly something we could bid at the pleasure of the council. Yes.
So for next steps, anybody else on this before we move on? For next steps, is this going to go to Planning Commission and come up to us? Does it come to us and go to them?
I think what we will likely do is our next step will be the Planning Commission, and then come back to council.
That would be a really good idea. Okay, good. All right. So we're counting on you guys again to get it right. So, what is our next agenda item? Do we need a game update?
5-3, Boston.
No more updates.
No more updates. So we have Director Gonzalez, who's going to talk to us about the Mills Act contract update. Thank you.
I just wanted to remind everybody that the Mills Act is the economic incentive program for California for the preservation and restoration of qualified historic buildings by private property owners. And owners of historic buildings may qualify for property tax relief if they enter into a formal contract with the city agreeing to rehabilitate and maintain the historical and architectural character of the properties according to an approved rehabilitation and maintenance plan. As a way of background, currently we have 22 properties under the Mills Act contract, 3 of which are in compliance with the agreement since 2013. 19 have been determined to be non-compliant due to lack of submission of an annual rehabilitation and maintenance report. And out of quite interesting. We actually discovered in collaboration with the LA County Tax Assessor's Office that there were 3 properties that we do not have contracts for. So we actually got that contact information from the assessor. We sent out a letter and to those 3 property owners, and actually they had contracts in hand, and they provided those to the city. That is applicable to 2 of the property owners, and 1 still remains outstanding. We've also noted some current flaws in the overall reporting requirement. Currently, no inspections are required either upon the Mills Act agreement nor annual reporting. No clear determination on work allowed or disallowed. No distinction between interior versus exterior improvements. So right now, anybody can apply for a Mills Act as long as they have a designated structure. We not only look at exterior renovations, but we also allow for interior if they list that as a scope of project, and also internal systems such as mechanical systems, electrical and plumbing. So some of the proposed changes that we are considering is revealed in this table. The column to the left is the current ordinance requirement. Currently, as I mentioned before, exterior and interior improvements qualify for a Mills Act contract. Under the proposed changes, we would consider exterior building improvements only. The current ordinance also allows system improvements. And under the proposed modification, we would look at that a little bit more closely and allow limited system improvements, again, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. We've had some applications where people have actually listed the scope of work as repairing or replacing pool equipment, and we wanted to look at that a little bit more closely. The current ordinance also is codified, allowing for a 10-year contract, and it has an auto renewal at the end of the contract on a yearly basis. The proposed amendment would be a 10-year maximum contract with no auto renewal. However, that won't prohibit the property owner to resubmitting for the Mills Act contract for an additional 10 years. If there's still work that is still outstanding and they can prove that the work that has been done to date was in compliance with the Mills Act scope of work. And also, the current ordinance does require you to submit an annual report to maintain compliance. That level of documentation would still be relevant for the proposed change. However, for non-compliant properties, non-compliant properties may not be renewed and also may trigger cancellation. And this is part of the language that's included within the Mills Act contract itself. And the current Mills Act contract currently states that if there's a failure to comply, it could trigger automatic cancellation and could also result in the demand of payment of a fee of 12.5% of the current fair market value of the property. So at this point, we are seeking some direction from council and the Planning Commission to see how we would like to proceed with this issue.
So what first brought this all to your attention? Was there some incident that happened, or we just decided to look into it?
I can tell you, as long as I've been on the Plan Commission, which is now like my second tour of duty, over 10 years.
Have you ever not been on the Planning Commission?
A long time ago, though.
Oh, really? Okay.
The Mills Act was brought up, but there was nothing in place to check and see if the houses were being kept in the manner in which the contract stated. And
so it kind of
I
goes
mean, I've
back.
personally, in the past, I've personally recommended to staff, why don't you just give 4 addresses to each person on the Planning Commission? We'll drive by and take a picture every year to make sure that, it looks like it used to. Anything that would ensure that the spirit is being maintained.
So this kind of goes back to Annie's, recommendation of oversight.
Yeah, long ago, when we had a separate Cultural Heritage Commission, we used to review these. And when the Cultural Heritage duties got switched to Planning Commission, I guess that fell through the cracks.
So I have a question just for better understanding. And so in this annual plan, it's not as if work has to be done, it's just that things need to be maintained as when it was originally approved. Is that correct?
Actually, work does have to be done. So that maintenance and restoration plan will itemize almost on a yearly basis, but overall, over a 10-year period, all the systems or the exterior improvements that would occur on the property.
So give me an example. What do you mean?
So simple, some of us, maybe one of the first things somebody wants to do is to install a new roof on the house. And that would be listed on the maintenance plan. So if that was the first thing that they did that year, they would show us receipts or evidence that that was conducted. And also, we can go out and inspect, and you would easily see that that particular scope of work has been completed.
So, Mayor, to add to that point, the subsidy on each property, I think it can be as high as 60% of property tax. I'll let Director Gonzalez correct me if I'm wrong. But when we started pulling items that have been permitted, it was quite common to find no improvements in the past 25 years, or only adding an exterior fence or a hot tub. And when we talk about reviewing the work plan annually, the purpose of the Mills Act is to use the subsidy to keep the house in its historic condition.
Thank you. We have a question from Councilmember Cappuccio.
So when an applicant puts in their application, you do a calculation based on the work plan of how much relief they're going to get from property tax?
We do. It's a financial analysis. It's a conceptual snapshot of what the tax savings would be, what the tax savings benefits would be to the applicant, and how much money the city would be deferring instead of collecting. And that evaluation is actually formalized by the LA County Assessor's Office.
Okay, so it varies based on the applicant's work plan? I mean, is the applicant's work plan and the cost of it figured into the relief you get in property tax?
So what occurs is the applicant will submit the work plan and will itemize what that cost is.
Yeah.
The evaluation assessment in terms of cost is based on rental income, and the county actually, when they assess the property, that's what they utilize. And I'm not sure if they really necessarily look at the scope of work that's going to be completed.
Okay, so is maybe I'm not asking the question.
The answer is no. It's the calculation of property tax savings is based on market value and rental analysis. It's not anything to do with the work. But when we review it, we want to make sure that the scope of work is commensurate, that it's equitable, that they would get that savings. So we could approve it with no work and say, well, we just like you or something.
Okay.
But what we tend to do is say, okay, we want a commensurate amount of work.
Okay, yes, appreciate that. So they're going to get this for 10 years. Now, when we get on top of this and require annual reports, so then you can see whether they're keeping with the work plan that you approved, and if they are not, you can cancel the contract.
Yeah, that's the theory, although the penalty for cancellation is pretty draconian, 12.5% of the property value. So probably what would happen is we would just let it expire after 10 years unless it was an egregious.
Okay, well, see, I have a little problem with that because they can write anything they want on that damn work plan and not comply, and still they're getting the benefit of the savings, and it goes on for 10 years.
Right. So I think the current ordinance, but it should do this, is that at some point, if they're not complying, it would come back to the Cultural Heritage Commission, which is now the Planning Commission, to review, and we would probably attempt to get them in compliance.
Yeah, but
and
who would bring that back, though?
Well, if they're not doing the annual reports, nobody. That's
Yeah.
what's happening now.
Yeah.
And even worse is that because it annually renews, in the 11th and 12th year, there's no work plan. And so they're actually in compliance because they don't have any work they're required to do. And so we don't have any right to cancel them. So at that point, you really want to let the contract expire. And really, if it's only flagrant violations, would you cancel?
Mayor, that point's correct. The 12.5% penalty of current fair market value is very strict. So we would think cancellation would be a very last option. The non-renewal, there's a couple of ways you can non-renew, where it's non-renewal within the year, or you can choose to let the property taxes increase for the remainder of whatever 10-year term they're in. Right now, non-compliance would be determined by staff. Staff has broad authority to negotiate the contract, and then it's ultimately approved by council. So council would be the approving authority for these contracts. We would not cancel a contract without bringing it to council. We likely, even though I believe we have the authority as staff, we likely would not non-renew a contract without bringing it to council, just because of the subsidy that's involved.
So it sounds to me like the first thing we have to get going is like some sort of annual report. So that would be a really good start, huh?
Yeah, we're going to send out, assuming both bodies are in agreement after tonight, we're going to send out certified letters to the 19 properties that are currently non-compliant, and we're going to give a final notice, again certified, to the one property that was discovered and has yet to provide the Mills Act contract. And then the annual reports will come in, they'll sit down with staff, we'll look at the work plan, and we will start the annual report process.
Okay.
Question on, so what I'm trying to wrap my head around is they're required to submit an annual report, and so we've got 19 to 22 of these properties in town, and it's on an annual basis. Is it something, because we don't get them, we're not as a city going out to police them, basically? Like, is there an alert or a trigger that says we haven't gotten something from X property in 18 months or 2 years? Like,
so it's a fair point, and we have not managed this program well as a government. There are likely people that have all of their annual reports ready to go, and they're like, I'm just waiting for the city to contact me. We also think there's probably other people that are unaware that they even have a Mills Act contract. Most of these properties haven't been, unless they've been in front of council recently, have not been contacted since the initial Mills Act contract was given.
and it doesn't work the other way, where we, almost like an inspection, like on an annual basis, to go out and visually inspect the property, and or is it something they need to bring their paperwork in, and Director of Planning has to sit down and kind of see what they've done? So we don't go out and look at it. It has to come into the city.
Both of those points will be true going forward. They'll be required to submit the annual plan. We will do an exterior inspection upon receipt of that plan moving forward. Again, we're not trying to fault the property owners. Many of these houses are going to be compliant. Again, the government has over time managed this program quite poorly.
I have a question on the non-renewal. If somebody is in their automatic renewal period after the 10-year contract, could we, and we find they're then not doing anything or not compliant, can we non-renew on an annual basis, or does that renew for another 10-year period?
There's two lines of thought on how the Mills Act contract works, and city attorneys will give you a different opinion. One is every year it renews for a 10-year period. The other one is at the end of the 10-year period it renews for a 1-year period. Both are evergreen contracts, but the non-renewal would be different depending on how you approach it. I suspect when we look at all the Mills Act contracts, we will probably have a mixture of both.
And so if we going forward want to have it where it doesn't automatically renew, we could do that on new Mills Acts, but can we retroactively go back to these old ones that are in the auto-renew stage and do that?
We could not go back and change the terms of the contract unilaterally. We could non-renew the contract and for any number of reasons, and ask them to come back in front of council and ask for a new Mills contract with the new terms. But we would not be able to go back and unilaterally change the terms.
I have a question. Go ahead.
No, you do. No, go.
Just following up on my colleague here, Councilmember Capocia. This all seems really loosey-goosey to me. I guess my feeling about it is these are worthwhile subsidies. I think we all agree on that. But I don't get a sense that we have any clue as to whether or not the costs that are incurred in the maintenance of these properties have anything to bear on the subsidy that they're getting. And I would like to see, no matter how the formula is calculated, I'd like to see a tighter accounting of that. Because I don't see any reason why we should be subsidizing people thousands of dollars a year if they're not spending thousands of dollars a year on that house.
And that's certainly something council can ask for when it comes forward. The most recent Mills Act contract that this council approved, which is one of the 3 that's in compliance, they were able to provide.
Thank goodness for that.
They were able to provide a work plan that showed they were spending funds in excess of the subsidy over the 10 years. We did do pre-inspection, and we will receive an annual report from them.
There's an equity issue. We have lots of property taxpayers in this city who are paying property taxes, pretty high property taxes, as they bought their house in recent years. And I don't think if this is a small issue, if they were aware of what the nature of these subsidies really are. So,
but you have to go back and remember that the initial purpose is to help preserve certain structures.
Right.
You can't get a Mills Act on just any house.
Right. I get that, and they should be preserved.
And they should be preserved. And as someone who is in that process, once you own that thing, it doesn't pay you, you pay it a lot.
But that's what I'm thinking.
But it's
there
also
are people who are probably way upside down in their own funds, but there are probably some, I'm guessing, don't know because we don't know.
But
we're subsidizing people that don't need the subsidy.
But there's still a value to the community because the house is preserved. And the minute they go off contract, you lose that leverage. And are you willing?
Necessarily.
Well, if they.
No, are they or are they not a registered historical site?
They could or could not be. They're not always.
No, I think you need to get on the list before you get the Mills Act.
Well,
but in this town,
it was done in the past, but that's my understanding.
But in this town, people were able to go off that historical list as well.
They were at one point.
Yeah. So I mean, while I'm sympathetic to the cost issue, I'm also concerned that we not lose any historical structures. You know, and as someone who has a contract, I can tell you right now that it's doing me no good because my Prop 13 taxes are lower than my Mills Act, so I don't need Mills Act.
So I think
so if you've been around long enough, the Mills Act is not doing you any good, and so you're going to pay me. If you want to do that, if you want to do that math.
So, Mayor, two points on that. One, the Mills Act runs with the land, so at some point, though the subsidy may not be as valuable to the current landowner, the next landowner is really going to appreciate it. And I think the point Councilmember Goss was trying to make is it's a benefit to the community if the subsidy is being applied to the preservation, and if the subsidy is not being applied to the preservation.
Exactly.
Right.
I still can't see anybody walking away from a Mills Act contract because you're going to pay the property tax. Instead of paying tax, just spend the money on the house.
Yeah,
Why would somebody walk away from it? It doesn't make sense.
Well, I think I think most of them, if not all of them, are. It's just an issue of compliance to making sure that's happening. And I think this is just a situation where we've had sort of stuff fall through cracks.
You know,
one question I had was on the actual work plan. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it required that the cost associated with that plan is sort of like you almost get a contractor's bid or a qualified number? So it's not like a bunch of lines and the homeowner's filling in, well, that'll be 15 grand, that'll be 30 grand, there's some vetting of that, right?
No, there isn't.
So they can put whatever they want.
Generally, they're going to put down what they have. Usually, we're assuming that they're working with a contractor or an architect to identify potential costs. But at this point, we're taking that in good faith.
So is that something that can be required? I mean, it seems like if they're going to say they're putting in 150 grand into this property over 10 years based on the 20 things they're doing, you can get numbers for that work plan if they know
I think the proposals to increase the proposals to increase the scrutiny. We want realistic figures. We would be more concerned that if they say they're putting a roof on or windows or fixing their HVAC, that the work is completed to maintain the historic nature of the property. So if we see something outlandish, $1 million for a roof, there'll be a heightened level of scrutiny. But again, right now we don't do pre-inspection or post-contract signing inspection, and we'll be doing both of those things.
Well, you also can require that it's your year-end review, rolling over into the next year, that receipts be provided for the work, too, and that's the reality cross-check on the numbers that are put down. However, I want to point out that in most cases, if we were to approve work, I mean, it's still optional for us to give a Mills Act contract or to not. And we can do that based largely on the significance of the proposed work, the value of the proposed work to the community. That most work that is going to be valuable that way turns out to be substantially more expensive than the value of the dollar value of the Mills Act itself.
Right.
It rarely is that you're the only guy who's upside down that way.
Well, only because I've owned it since the 80s. So
yeah, so we rarely have that other problem. If somebody is asking for a Mills Act, but their proposal is such insignificant work that we can't even tell that we're on the right side of things by order of magnitude, we can just refuse to give them the Mills Act contract. Big deal.
And if I could also point out, any work, additions, or alterations to an historic resource with the Mills Act contract requires a certificate of appropriateness, and the review body is the Planning Commission for that.
I would recommend that, because they could have somebody want to put in vinyl windows, on a historic structure, and that would not be appropriate.
No, the review and approval, the discretionary review and approval process should be consistent, meaning that it's subject to the certificate of appropriateness process. Keep you consistent across the board.
So I'm going to open this up for public comment. Do you have enough direction from us, or do we need to continue discussing?
We have direction, Mayor.
Okay. I'm going to open this item up for public comment. Do we have anybody who would want to talk about the Mills Act? No? Okay. I'm closing public comment, and you have enough direction from us. So why don't we go on to our third?
The one thing we talked about this internal systems, but not internal sort of nice things or just cosmetic. On that, if we have limited systems, we need to make sure we include structural and foundation. I saw the HVAC and stuff like that.
Part of the building improvements to the foundation structure itself. And then the internal system, we were really looking more at the mechanical, electrical, plumbing.
Which you should, because if it's old electrical and the place burns down, it has no historic value left for us.
Historic ash.
Details.
Put the ashes in there or something.
Okay, so our last item for discussion tonight is something I have never heard about, so thank you for teaching us tonight. Soft first-story buildings.
So I'd like to start with a little analogy. 8 or 10 years ago, before the drought, and I want to thank Councilman Capocha for bringing this up a lot, because we were unaware of some of the challenges in our water system in town. But because of the drought, we've made modifications so that all the citizens can have a safe and ample source of water. And fortunately for us, a drought is a rather slow-moving emergency, and it gives us time to respond appropriately. But I'm here to talk about a challenge in our city's housing stock that will be evident in a rather more fast-moving emergency, namely an earthquake. And I want to start by acknowledging Rod Spears for his engineering help, because he and I did the surveys, but without his help, this project would not have done at all. So we will start with soft first-story buildings, and that is a multi-story building in which one or more floors have windows or doors or open areas that would normally be required for stability as a matter of earthquake engineering design. And a typical soft first story is an apartment building located over a ground level with large openings such as a parking garage or a series of retails, and that's what they call tuck under parking. And so the reason I bring this up is that soft first story buildings are vulnerable to collapse in either a moderate or severe earthquake, and it's known as soft story for collapse. The biggest example in our area right now is the soft first story collapse of the Northridge Garden apartments in Northridge in which 16 people were killed. And how was our survey done? Rod and I drove around and we did a windshield survey, and we drove through only the sections of town zoned for multi-occupancy. So these are our apartment buildings. These are not single-family buildings. These are buildings with 10, 15, 20 people in them. And the survey is an initial first pass and should not represent a final definitive list. Like I said, we just drove around and stuck whatever we could see from the street. In some cases, we found that there were 2 stories of residences over an open parking place. But the survey did identify buildings with tuck under parking and those that need further review. So we broke them out into 2 categories. And all inspections was done visibly from a public area. So we just stood at the streets, and this is what we saw. We found 33 structures that had tuck under parking. We found another 33 that had tuck under parking, or that because they were either blocked or because we couldn't, inspect, we thought needed further review. And we found 57 that appears to meet structural standards. So we found 123 buildings. So it's not a small percentage of our multiple occupancy buildings in town. There's, lots and lots of people living in those 123 buildings. To give you an example of what they look like, the picture on the left, that might be a city vehicle parked underneath there. And then in the middle, you notice that whole building almost looks like it's levitated. It's up on those posts. And on the right was just a pretty standard apartment building for the city of Sierra Madre. There are a lot of those around. And so, like I said, we found at least 33 that we were pretty sure were not self-levitating, and another 33 that were probably going to need some further inspection. So it was an issue. Like I said, in even a modern emergency, they pose a hazard. Both Rod and I served on our fire department, but during a much different time. When I was the fire chief, we had 40 volunteers, and during the 1991 Sierra Madre earthquake, we were all busy. We were running all over town. We had, in addition to everything else, we had chimneys coming through roofs and a lot of things like that. And all of you who are here remember that. Today, your fire department consists of 6 people who are on duty, and it'll only take one of these buildings to fail, and your entire department will be overwhelmed by the events, by the rescue or the preservation. It may be very possible that some people will be injured and others will need to be rescued, and you only have 6 people to do it. So I believe that the city has some kind of obligation to ensure the safety of the citizens and to protect them from known hazards. So when you look around the city, by the way, this is not tuck under parking. This is just a carport, and the reason is that there's no residential occupancy above. When you look at this building, we decided this is an example of needs further inspection because we couldn't see inside and we don't know how it was constructed. So those are your options for your, those 66 buildings. The unreinforced masonry structures is a type of building where load-bearing walls, non-load-bearing walls, or other are made of brick or cinder block or even adobe in this town, and are not braced by reinforcing materials such as rebar, concrete, or cinder block. It's called URM. for unreinforced masonry are vulnerable to collapse in an earthquake. One problem is that most mortar used to hold bricks together is not strong enough. In addition, some of the elements on the front may peel from the building and fall onto occupants or passerbys outside. These buildings tend to self-destruct. An interesting piece of background is in California, construction of new unreinforced masonry was prohibited in 1933 because we had a large earthquake in Long Beach, California, the 1932 Long Beach earthquake. That also changed the way public schools were designed. There's a Field Act that is in place so that public schools are designed not to fail in an emergency, in an earthquake. A state law was enacted in 1986 requiring seismic retrofitting of existing structures. Retrofits are generally intended to prevent injury and death to people, but not protect the buildings. The building codes are to make sure that people can get out without dying. It's not to keep the building so that it won't fail. So there's a point there. So in '86, the city had a list of buildings, and what we did is a records survey. So we went down to the basement of City Hall and we pulled the file for each one of those addresses, and we looked to see which ones had a completed, signed-off inspection for retrofitting for unreinforced masonry. We found that 27 did have a sign-off, 29 had no evidence of a final inspection or a sign-off, and in the process we found that the 4 buildings were demolished. One of the biggest ones we all remember from the '91 earthquake is that the church at the top of 700 North Sunnyside was torn down. There were also some buildings in town that in the '80s that there was a large fire in town, and they were retrofitted. So we found 60 structures. Now, we were using a list that staff found from in response to the '86 law being passed. We further walked around and looked at some buildings that showed evidence on the exterior of some work that was completed. So we found buildings that looked like somebody had done something, but they didn't always correspond to the ones that had permits or sign-offs. One of the ones that did was of a slight concern was 55 West Sierra Madre Boulevard, because at the time that was the City Hall, and the city was exempt from some of this stuff, but it has since been sold. So you'll have to talk to the city attorney to find out if we still have any liability on the fact, or that would ever come back to haunt us. These are pictures of where there's been some retrofit. There's evidence that somebody has gone through to make sure that the walls do not move enough so that the roof will fall in, and that's why those are there. But so there is some evidence, and there's one place in town that's one of my favorite pizza places that shows that they've actually put I-beams inside the building to hold up the roof so that the roof won't fall and fail in an earthquake. So we have a situation where I've identified these buildings, and it's a concern.
Thank you. Yes, you're dying to ask a question.
I don't know if I'm dying to, but Commissioner Spears, thank you so much, and please thank Mr. Spears, also Rod Spears, for all the work that you put in here. Obviously, this took some time, not only to do the drive around, but also to do the research and pull the permits. And thank you, and this is new for me also. I just had a question with respect to the soft story buildings and the ones that appeared to meet standards. How did you qualify that?
Rod is an engineer. He's a building engineer, structural engineer, so he got to decide.
Okay. So visually he looked and he said that appears to meet standards?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So, but that list is far from being the definitive list.
Sure.
So one of our recommendations is that the city have a definitive list. You can't manage what you don't know. And if nothing else, that list be made a public document.
What is the city's responsibility for the private property?
So, Commissioner Spears, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the state law drop dead date was 1998.
Yeah.
To have this addressed. Some neighboring cities, I think, most famously Pasadena, would actually red tag buildings if they weren't retrofitted and not allow people to be in there. So it's hard to answer what the liability is at this point. I think our base level of responsibility is to perform our due diligence, create a list, and determine appropriate steps forward how we can help people come into compliance.
Is that the 98? Is that for unreinforced masonry or soft first story or both?
Reinforced masonry.
So the 86 law that that gave I guess that sounds like 12 years or something to comply. Is there a corresponding law for the soft first stories, or is it just an issue that the building codes have been updated and these are under antiquated building codes?
There are some cities that have been more emphatic about changing that. A good example is the city of Los Angeles, and it was the Northridge Garden Apartments that 16 people died, so they decided, well, we should do something about this.
But there's not a corresponding state law.
I don't think there's a state law for that.
Does that have to do with the ability to create local amendments to the state building code?
I believe that's correct.
And are we just deficient with respect to the 1998 law?
It appears that this is something else that has not been on the radar, and so initially, turnover in city staff after the 86 law was passed, and you had till a certain date, and that drop dead date didn't appear on anyone's calendar, and so people that postponed it were able to continue to postpone compliance. I don't think that the soft first story issue has been on our agenda.
Do you have any questions over here?
Well,
or comments or discussion?
Yeah, I mean, basically, just real simple. I mean, as you mentioned, you talked to the city attorney. I mean, what is our liability in a case like this? But I do agree with Mr. Spears that I do feel that we have an obligation to protect our residents in town, and they're going in and out of these buildings. We've got people that living in these apartments that are probably not aware of the danger that they are in. So,
I think our obligation's a lot more clear and easy to understand than our liability at this point. So it's hard to lay out what exactly our liability would be, but I do think, again, at a basic level, it's something we need to address. We are going to have to consult with the city attorney and a number of other experts. When we first saw the survey, to say it wasn't anybody's radar is correct. When I first saw the survey, I was surprised where the condo I live in is on there, and I'd never thought of it. So it's. I fully understand.
He's motivated.
Timing is everything.
I think to answer your question, we're going to have to put something together to address this, regardless almost of what liability is. But we'll consult with the city attorney.
Yeah. Okay.
The good news is that there are other cities that are a lot farther down this road and are being very, for lack of a better term, proactive about addressing the issue. And so it's not as if we have to invent a lot.
Right. I think the other thing is obviously with unreinforced masonry, there's a state law that gives us the vehicle to require compliance, but we could at least provide information to property owners for the soft first story. And then also is the issue of the fire department. I mean, they should have an inventory of this and understand how to deal with it, because as you said, if there's an earthquake, we could have a lot of failures, and having that information ahead of time, I think, could be probably very helpful.
The fire department may have a role in this because these are all buildings, because they're multiple occupancy buildings or commercial buildings where there is an annual inspection. So I'm sure they can help confirm the list.
If there is a collapse of a soft story, is there any triage capability, or is that just a matter of waiting till the building is disassembled and see?
If there is a collapse,
yeah, is there
that building's done.
Well, no, I mean for with respect to people who might be underneath. The pancake.
It's going to be a hellacious task. Who was there? Who was in the building? I mean, it's going to take quite a. You're going to end up first having to search the initial structure, and then you're going to have to confirm that everyone who lived there was either gone or has been accounted for. And, you know, some of these buildings don't have a lot of people in them, and if there's more than one building, you're going to be very challenged to be able to manage that task.
And if you have injured people that are in the pancake story, they don't necessarily are able to wait for the bureaucratic process.
That's what happened in Northridge Garden Apartments, yeah. People were trapped in there and some died inside.
What, waiting?
Waiting.
Yeah.
And do you have a sort of ballpark idea on how much retrofitting costs? I mean, this isn't an issue where these things need to be demolished and built from scratch.
No. I'm aware that in other cities there are contractors who just do this 24/7 because because other cities have implemented laws about this. And so there are some rather standard procedures for doing that. And in the case of unreinforced masonry, it's how much you want to preserve the building.
Right. But I mean, the software story, a lot of that stuff is just a structural thing that can be
What happens is the building goes back and forth in an earthquake, but because it's only sitting on these one little sticks, it falls over. So you end up having to reinforce that square so that it has lateral support.
Yeah, it does a lot of this too. Yeah, I know that the building codes have.
Yeah, City of Los Angeles, for instance, already has some technical guidelines that have been published for how to.
Oh yeah, this is.
We're not inventing.
No, we're not inventing it. We're not on the cutting edge of anything here.
Well, and one bit of good news is we've recently updated our non-conforming ordinance, and structural updates like this are totally allowed, even if the building is non-conforming. So that's something that we should definitely encourage.
Well, it sounds like we're all in agreement that we need to preserve this, and city manager has been tasked with that. Do we have any public comment on this topic?
Just a quick question too, as they're coming up, Director Gonzalez or City Manager, do we have a list of all the owners of all of our buildings in town? No. I'm seeing heads shaking no.
We would look at water bills to acquire the most current property owner, because many of these buildings are not owned by people who live in Sierra Madre.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome back.
Hi, Robert Jardy again. I work with the Sierra Madre Community Emergency Response Team and the Sierra Madre Emergency Communications Team. We just had our CERT training last week, 32 new graduates in Sierra Madre.
Great, fantastic.
And one thing we do is we do triage. But in the case of a building collapse, we won't touch it because we're all civilians. We're not professionals. We don't have the equipment to go in and do that sort of thing. I'm not sure how much the fire department can even do at this point with the number of people they have. So if there is a building collapse like that, we would move on, because we would try and rescue as many people as possible and not spend all of our efforts on a single place like the fire department might have to do. They might go to the single worst place and try and deal with that. So I would encourage the city to address this issue however you can. I don't know if there are tax rebates or building permit fee reductions that can be done to help encourage these business or apartment owners to address the issue, but certainly would encourage you to do that.
Thank you. And thank you for volunteering. We appreciate it. Do we have anybody else from the audience who would like to speak on this issue? If not, we'll bring it back. So like I said before, it sounds like we're all in agreement we need to do something with this, and thank you, Commissioner Spears, for bringing this to our attention. So that concludes all of our discussion items. Is there anything else y'all wanted to talk about? Or do you just want
score?
That's a final score.
Not good.
Okay.
Okay, never mind. With that, I could take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you again for joining us. We'll do this again next year.